Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Buwan Jones. I'm the Gauteng Provincial Manager and the Chairperson of the Alexandra Inquiry. I act under the delegated powers of our commissioners and the Office of the Public Protector, who has duly authorized our colleague to be part of this process. Thank you for coming to the inquiry. Before I call the first participant, I would like to make some opening remarks. As you are aware, this inquiry was established in the wake of protests in Alex from the 2nd of April. Reports indicated that the protest was about the socio-economic conditions in Alex. In terms of Section 15 of the South African Human Rights Commission Act, the Commission is empowered to require any person by notice in relation to an investigation to appear before it and to produce any document which may be necessary in connection with that investigation. The parties we've invited since the commencement of this process have a substantial and direct interest in the subject matter of the inquiry. Some have been implicated, and as the two constitutional bodies, we have a duty to act fairly and afford them an opportunity to either confirm or rebut any submissions that are made against them. The panel's mandate is to inquire, make findings, report on, and make recommendations concerning whether there are violations of the rights contained in the Bill of Rights, corruption, improper conduct, maladministration, as they relate to persons residing in Alexandra. The Commission and the Office of the Public Protector will further investigate the following: the causes or reasons behind the protests in Alexandra, how the three spheres of government have dealt with grievances related to the provision of services in Alexandra, whether the City of Johannesburg has engaged meaningfully and in good faith with the Alexandra community with a view to finding humane and pragmatic solutions to their grievances related to provision of municipal services, whether the Department of Human Settlements, Cooperative Governance, Social Development, SABC, Basic Education have responded to the ongoing social challenges in Alex, whether the alleged 1.3 billion budget allocated for the Alexandra renewal project was utilized for the purpose which it was intended, and if not, whether such resulted into the prejudice to the community of Alexandra, whether there has been structured, consistent, and careful engagement with the community of Alexandra by the three spheres of government, whether there has been any administrative, operational, and financial challenges experienced by the three spheres of government that impede or have impeded on access to socio-economic rights in Alexandra, whether the budget allocation and distributive decisions to date of the three spheres of government in respect of Alexandra are reasonable and commensurate with the progressive realization of the rights of the community, whether the three spheres of government devised and implemented a coherent and coordinated program designed to meet their constitutional obligations, with particular emphasis on the rights to water, sanitation, housing, and environment, whether the three spheres of government have either devised, implemented, monitored, or ensured the development and rollout of a housing program in Alex, incorporating reasonable measures to provide relief for those in need of housing, including urgent and emergency housing, whether alternatives including resettlement, relocation, land, and or stand allocation have been developed to ensure access to adequate housing for the Alexandra community over time. And lastly, the adequacy of policing in the community of Alexandra, specifically as it impacts vulnerable and marginalized persons, with particular reference to women, children, persons with disabilities, for non-nationals and the LGBTQI community. The Commission will receive both written and oral submissions from identified and interested parties for the purposes of this inquiry. The terms of reference provide the framework for the inquiry and may not be materially amended unless specifically approved by the Commission and the Office of the Public Protector. Parties may be legally represented, but oral submissions must be made by the parties themselves. This is an inquisitorial process. The members of the panel will direct questions to the witnesses and/or participants. The inquiry panel has determined that these proceedings should be open to members of the public, including the media, having regard to the public interest nature of this matter or inquiry, the constitutional obligations of both the Public Protector and the Human Rights Commission to observe the principles of accountability, openness, and transparency. On the 22nd of May, the South African Human Rights Commission issued a notice to the economic freedom fighters. This correspondence was directed to the leader of the economic freedom fighters. In our letter, we indicate that we are currently involved in an investigation into allegations of widespread human rights violations, and we raise other issues pertaining to corruption. And we state that during the course of the inquiry, we received testimony from the former MEC of Human Settlements in Gauteng, Mr. Dikgang Uhuru Muilwa, in which he asserted that a number of informal settlements have sprouted up in Alexandra and in various areas as a result of the call for land occupation by the leader of the economic freedom fighters. And the inquiry, therefore, was of the view that Mr. Malema's testimony to the inquiry could be assistance to the inquiry. He was duly notified to appear before this inquiry today to provide oral and written submissions and answer questions posed by the panel, particularly with regard to EFF's position on land occupation in general and Alexandra in particular, and any information that Mr. Malema and the economic freedom fighters may have relating to the Alexandra renewal project. This morning, or a short time ago, the inquiry panel received communication from the Secretary General of the EFF, in which it is stated that the Gauteng High Court requires the presence of the leader of the economic freedom fighters, Mr. Malema. There was judgment, there is judgment that is scheduled to be handed down today. There is judgment that is regarding the judge. There is judgment that is scheduled to be handed out today, or it may have already been handed down. And as such, the EFF CIC or leader offered an unconditional apology for not coming today, and he has expressed his willingness to partake in this process should the Commission feel that the information that will be shared today with the Commission is inadequate. And on the basis of that, the Commander-in-Chief of the EFF has asked the provincial chairperson to deliver a written submission that he was going to deliver. And he has also tasked other national leaders who are with the provincial chairperson to also represent the EFF national leadership. As the Commission is seeking clarity and explanation on their posture on land in general, land occupation in general, and in Alexandra in particular. So it is on that basis that those present here today, you are not seeing the leader of the EFF, and we'll continue with this process. We have accepted the apology, and we'll continue with the inquiry and take the oral submissions from the leader of the EFF in Gauteng and members of the Central Command team. You will be given an opportunity to take us through your oral submissions, and after which the panel will ask questions. And we will now allow you to do that. Please introduce your team and take us through your oral submission. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction and the details. My name is Mandisa Mashego. I'm the Provincial Chairperson for the Economic Freedom Fighters in Gauteng. I am accompanied by the National Spokesperson, Dr. Mbuyiseni Ndlozi, National Spokesperson for the EFF, as well as the Regional Chairperson for the Economic Freedom Fighters in Johannesburg region, where Alexandra is obviously located. And then we also have our lawyer, our internal head of legal.
Thank you. You may proceed.
Yes, thanks. Firstly, let me also accept rather your generosity in accepting the President's apology, but state that additionally, because the situation of Alexandra, which is a decades-old situation of socio-economic deprivation, is a Gauteng situation, we also believed that even if the President were to appear, he would have appreciated to be accompanied by ourselves so that we can provide clarity where needed on practical issues, because we are on the ground and deal with the day-to-day realities of the citizens of Gauteng, especially areas like Alexandra that are considered primary constituencies for the EFF. And so it is in that context that we make the submission. Primarily, I think it's common knowledge to everyone that the EFF's first, not only policy position, but also a manifesto position, which we have reiterated across 3 elections so far, and also which is clearly stipulated in our founding manifesto, is that the EFF exists primarily to advance the struggle for land justice, and of course, which translates into economic justice ultimately. Why do I say that? Because our first policy position is that land in South Africa must be expropriated without compensation for the purposes of redistributing it equitably to the people of South Africa. And to accentuate that, we have twice, if I'm not wrong, Commissar, in Parliament submitted motions to that effect. The first one was in 2014, it was rejected, and then the last one was the one we all know of 2017, which was eventually, or early 2018, which was eventually adopted as a resolution of Parliament and widely and led to the countrywide public participation process, which we all know of, and the establishment of the Constitutional Review Committee in Parliament, which is still seized with that task. And therefore, it is in that context that we will make our submissions on the Alexandra situation with the backdrop of the land dispossession history of South Africa, which started officially on the 3rd of April, 1652, with the arrival, the unwelcome arrival of Jan van Riebeeck. And so it is in that context and related matters that we will be making submissions. And of course, we also note that the Commission would have liked the President to comment on the EFF's assertions, or his own assertions as well, on the Alexandra Renewal Project. We will subject ourselves to your line of questioning in relation to that, to the best of our ability. And of course, lastly, I will confer with colleagues and, of course, the leadership of the EFF sitting with me, and, of course, our legal representative when I deem it fit to do so. If I can get your indulgence on that, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I earlier read out correspondence that was transmitted to the Secretary General of the EFF, Mr. Gotrich Gadi, and I have not had a response from an official response from the EFF to that. Former MEC for Human Settlements, Mr. Dikgang Hurumula, appeared before this commission and made several allegations. And we are enjoined by the Constitution, rules of natural justice, to act fairly and to afford those who are implicated an opportunity to either confirm or rebut assertions or allegations or submissions that are made or which implicate them. And the assertion of the MEC was that informal settlements in Alexandra have sprouted up in Alex and in various areas as a result of the call for land occupation by the leader of the EFF. Can we get a response to that from the EFF? Thank you.
Ngiyabonga. I think it's a well-known fact that Alexandra dates back to around the early 1900s. And when it was established, it was not classified a formal settlement in any particular way, except for the fact that it was a farm that was owned by some white person. I'll remember the name and mention it. And due to the influx of, I think you understand the labor environment and the migrant history of South Africa in relation to the gold activity around that time. So due to the influx of people and also, obviously, some of the colonial apartheid actions that were deliberate, where the governments of the day would fetch black people from, coastal areas and surrounding areas to Johannesburg to bring them purely for slave labor purposes. Alexandra was one of the areas that became populated, particularly so that people are in close, black people are in close proximity to their sort of places of work. And it is with that history in mind that we all know how Alexandra was established, and that Alexandra did not even receive, as far back as 1904 up to 1982, Alexandra was not considered a formal settlement. However, there were black people there. So that would be my response to Mr. Moyiloa's comments, which obviously I must take your word for it. I did not actually hear him make them, but I can believe that he made them because he was the MEC for Human Settlements for a short time in the legislature. And with all due respect, he was not exactly the most diligent and competent guy. But nonetheless, he has proven that, because he seems to be the only person who doesn't know that Alexandra was only declared as a formal residential area in 1982. Between 1904, when it was supposedly started to be established, when people settled on a farm which at the time was supposedly allocated to the name that I'm going to mention to you. And that's common purpose, it's historical knowledge. Therefore, my question is, in return, as a closing point on that question, on what grounds would Mr. Moyiloa say what he said when there was a population between 70 and I think 100,000 that grew in Alexandra from 1904 to 1982? How were those people classified to have been living in Alexandra? Were they legally settled? Were they not legally settled? If the settlement of Alexandra was only recognized by the apartheid state and given residential status in 1982, the rest of the time they were declared squatters of the farm that was allegedly owned by this certain gentleman with the name Papenfus, I think. Papenfus or Papenfas, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce it. But that is the situation.
Yeah. Can you read into record the excerpts from your founding manifesto that talk to the issue of land justice?
I will have to, our founding manifesto is quite in-depth. You'll have to give me a few minutes to find it and then read it for you, because obviously I understand it, but I do not memorize every page.
Yes,
of the founding manifesto. So we'll find it and then read it.
Whilst your colleagues are assisting to find it,
Yeah.
can you address us on the recent demolitions in Alex? The EFF was at the forefront on the entire weekend from Friday.
Yeah.
Subsequent to the demolitions.
Yes.
What was the level of involvement of EFF, and what do you make of the demolitions?
Yeah. I personally received a call early in the morning, around 8 o'clock, between 8 and 9. I could be wrong. I have to check my phone records, from a resident of that particular section where the illegal demolitions and evictions happened, from a female resident of the area who was basically in tears and asking that I intervene as the chairperson because she could not find other leaders locally, or she didn't have their numbers. And when I asked her why, she said no, there were red ants, thousands of red ants that had descended on the area, accompanied by the police and the JMPD, as well as some other private security company. I don't remember the name. She then said that, I then asked her what exactly is happening. Bear in mind, we get a lot of calls like that. We as the EFF, and we do go and get involved to try and offer some kind of support to the victims. And so it wasn't necessarily like a strange call for me to receive. And so she asked that we must intervene because they are under siege. Their houses are being demolished with TLBs. I think it was one TLB and two other demolition vehicles. I can't remember what she called them. And that, there are children and, who are unable to go to school. There's babies are crying, getting thrown out of their houses. And basically that also their property, their personal possessions are being squashed. And that they were not given a chance to collect anything. It was basically a nightmarish situation, the way she described it, that they first witnessed a formal, parade by the police and the JMPD officers along the road that is part of Marlborough Gardens. And immediately after the parade was finished, the actual demolition started with about, what they said it was almost 2,000 red ants, who then ran into houses and started shouting that everybody must leave, and they started beating people up and all sorts of chaos and mayhem, and the police started shooting randomly. And the demolishing started. What she described was basically a nightmarish situation. I was not able to respond to her immediately. I contacted the chairperson of Johannesburg, who indicated that they were attending an out-of-town meeting, the entire leadership of Johannesburg, as well as the PR councillors. So we couldn't find anyone immediate. I then instructed the provincial secretary, as is our organizational process, to either himself drop whatever he was doing and rush to Alexandra, or find anyone else nearby branches, because if you don't have the immediate leadership of the region, then the next level are the branch command team members of the local wards. And of course, bearing in mind it was during the week, we couldn't find branch leaders to go because our branch members are volunteers and they have their own jobs and careers and they cannot be readily available. So it is with that background that we then sent the provincial secretary there, and I then later joined him. I don't know if you want me to continue. Okay. And then when he arrived there, I had to conclude some other urgent tasks I had. I then asked him to let me know if he thinks I should come through as well, or whether he would be okay with the ward and whoever else, any other fighters that we would find. And when he arrived there, he called immediately and said that I think you should come through because the situation is dire. And I then said to him, well, in the meantime, before I get there, please talk to the most senior people who are there from the JMPD, which is the Johannesburg Metro Police Department, as well as the South African Police Service officials who are there, and ask them to give you at least an eviction court order. Because in my experience and in our experience, that kind of, I need to state a disclaimer that the demolition itself was illegal and, of course, grossly inhumane and not even in line with procedures of even a legal court order for evictions. Nonetheless, they couldn't give it to him. I then asked him to contact the South African Police Service Provincial Commissioner, which is something we normally do when we have a crisis. And then asked him to also contact the head of JMPD, which is something he did. He could not get hold of the Provincial Police Commissioner. I also couldn't get hold of the Provincial Police Commissioner because I then remembered that I actually had the previous Police Commissioner, Delanga, who was removed without any reasonable explanation by the ANC and replaced with a man. Delanga was a female, as you would note. And she was always very helpful to us, and that's why I always had her cell number. So the new guy, I don't have his number, we couldn't find him, but we tracked the head of JMPD, who confirmed to the provincial secretary, his name is Moshe Goma, that there was no court order. I then said to him, okay, that's fine, let's see what else we can do. I then attempted to contact the mayor of Johannesburg, who didn't answer his phone, and I then later learned that he was out of town attending his daughter's graduation in the US. I then tried to contact the MMC to verify what the provincial secretary had told me. The JMPD head told him that there was no court order.
Which MMC?
MMC Sun, for community safety, in the absence of the provincial commissioner. Remember that we've just restarted a new term in the legislature, so I couldn't offhand even remember who's the new MEC for community safety. But nonetheless, and also it would have been a little bit pointless to phone them because they're new in the role and all of that. And because JMPD was traceable, I thought it best to contact San direct because I have his contact details. And I then asked him, there's this situation, can you confirm that your officers are there legally, according to process? And he responded that he's surprised. He heard about what is happening there. However, he is instituting an investigation. I said to him, does that mean that you do not have a copy of the court order, or you are not familiar with what is happening there or aware? And he didn't respond, but just reiterated they are instituting an urgent investigation into the matter. I then arrived in Alexandra, eventually couldn't get into the area because of the police blockade, and then I had to come back again and eventually got to the area. And when I got to the area, the actual physical demolishing had just ended, and we then decided to call an urgent community meeting of all residents that were available so that they could give us a brief on what had transpired prior to our arrival there. and also to explain to us any other information that we needed, clarify whether they had been served with a court order, whether they had been informed prior to that day, the Friday, 31st May, about, their structures being demolished and them being evicted, etc., and all other technical information, which we could only get from the residents. We called the community meeting in the same location in an open space, because the area is informal, it doesn't have facilities like community halls, etc. And while we were still busy addressing, and bear in mind, I'm a member of the provincial legislature, and so is the provincial secretary. And therefore, we also have additional rights and privileges when it comes to representing constituencies in terms of calling meetings, etc. It's part of our constituency responsibilities, in fact, as members of the provincial legislature. So when we had convened the meeting and we had gathered whoever was physically there, because remember, other residents had gone to work, because this started at 8, so they had long gone to work. So who we could collect, we started addressing. Hardly 5 minutes after we started, I was addressing the meeting with the secretary next to me. And then rubber bullets started charging at us and the police vehicles. One was an Inyala, I think. I don't know the difference between the Inyala and the other bigger one. It started approaching us, and they started shooting with rubber bullets. Mainly it was the South African Police Service officers, and I can't remember what the JMPD officers were doing at the time. You must understand that that situation is an abnormal situation, and it's a highly charged situation, so I may not remember everything as it happened. Nonetheless, when they started shooting, I started going towards the police vehicle, and the community said, no, I must run away because they will not. So I said, no, they can't shoot at me. I'm a public representative, and I'm a leader of a political party, and I have every right to address the community. They may not, point guns at me while I'm doing my work. And the community said, no, you have to run. And even as that conversation was happening, they were coming closer towards us and shooting. And one police officer was particularly aimed at me. Some of the community members were taking videos. So there's a lot of video footage. Some of it we have, some we don't have. But those people who could take a video were taking videos. We then started running and into the structures, the houses in between. Then we ran as far back as possible to go in between the houses. And of course, then the meeting was not happening anymore. And we fell, and some people got shot. Women got shot again. Remember, this is, as far as I remember, probably the second time now the police started shooting since they started the demolition. Without warning, without any consideration for the fact that it was evident that we were in a meeting. And in fact, I could go as far as saying, I think it was a deliberate effort to actually even undermine our presence there, because some of those police officers know us from just engagements in the province. You would know that in 2014, we were assaulted by the TRT inside the legislature as EFF MPLs when the ANC speaker was refusing us to attend our work in overalls, etc. So we have an experience with the police officially, which dates back to 2014, of a lot of violence. And Alex was not the first, not the second, nor the third. We've had lots of incidents of being shot at by the police while addressing community meetings. And therefore, even though the experience was traumatic, but it was kind of like something that we've grown used to. And so we ran in between the houses for safety. And when it sounded like the shooting had stopped, we came out. Everybody basically came out to try to reconvene the community meeting. And I then instructed the provincial secretary to reconvene everybody and say, we are not going to be threatened by the police. We have to have this community meeting to get the facts of what has happened between 8 in the morning and at the time. So we have to have the meeting. There's no other way. So he must convene the people, and I will go to the police and approached them and asked them to refer me to the most senior officer on the scene, which is what we normally do. I then did that. A few community members and some fighters who were there also helping accompanied me to one of the officers whose name I don't know because he was not wearing a badge as he's supposed to. Majority of them were not wearing their badges, so we couldn't get their names. I then approached him. I said, please take me to the most senior officer because I need to understand the procedures and everything that is happening, and also why you are shooting at us. And then he then said he would take me to the senior person there. And we started walking up the road. And at the time, the situation was still charged. So some of the police officers and the JMPD officers were still demonstrating a lot of aggression towards us. But I said, no, I need to have a conversation with this person, so let's find him. And we then started walking up the road towards the person whom he was going to refer me to. And when we got to about, let's say, maybe 100 meters from where I started talking to him, and he was pointing at one of the police officers to say, this is the gentleman. Another police officer came, whose name I don't know, he was not wearing a badge, charging towards me with I think it's a rubber bullet gun, those long guns, pointed directly at me and said, I'll kill you if you move one step further. I then said to him, because now it's this gentleman in front of me, it's the one who is accompanying me, there's the one that I'm assuming I'm being taken to as the senior officer, and a few other police officers. And when this man shouted that he'll kill me if I make one more step closer, the community and the fighters who were accompanying us started, basically becoming extremely emotional and started shouting at him about the comment and all of that. And I eventually never got to meet the most senior officer. But the intention was to ask him to show us the eviction order, court order, and then explain why the shooting, etc., etc. And then, but that conversation never happened. Everything degenerated. We ended up having an altercation with the police. This one was eventually pushed away by the community, the one who was making threats of shooting and killing. And the police started pretending to be leaving the scene. They all started getting into their cars because the community came back charging. More community members started coming. And the whole situation broke up into mayhem, and the police got into their cars pretending to be leaving, but we later discovered that they were not leaving. They went down the road, came back again, regrouped, started shooting, and the entire experience was just running, getting shot at, trying to reconvene, no conversation with the police. And that's essentially the characterization of that day.
Please switch off the mic. Thank you. I know my fellow panel members have their own questions, but before they ask you questions, specifically the recent demolitions, can you read out the excerpts from your founding manifesto?
Thank you. Under Section 33 of the EFF's founding manifesto, it reads as follows: therefore, the EFF will be involved in mass movements. I don't know if I should let me read the one before, because it starts with therefore. Thank you, Commissioner. Economic freedom fighters will contest political power because we are guided by the firm belief that we need political power in order to capture the state and then transform the economy for the emancipation of black South Africans, especially Africans. The forms in which the EFF contests political power will, from time to time, be reviewed in the light of prevailing circumstances. But the primary role of mass organization and activism as a means to raise the political consciousness of the people will remain the bedrock of our political practice. Therefore, the EFF will be involved in mass movements and community protests that seek the betterment of people's lives. The EFF will also associate with movements that demand land through land occupation, aimed at making the message clear that our people do need land. The EFF will support all trade unions and workers that stand up in demand of better working conditions, and salaries wherever and whenever they do so. The EFF will not be bound by narrow alliance loyalties that compromise the interests of workers just because they are in a different trade union. Our pursuit of the basic demands of the Freedom Charter is above forms of organization that the working class and indeed black people may fashion in the course of struggles. In other words, alliances and other forms of organization are relevant to the extent that they maximize our march towards realizing the vision outlined in the Freedom Charter.
Thank you. The key thing that came out for me, there was demand land through land occupation. That's correct, right? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
No, thank you. Okay, I thought you wanted to add something. I'll now allow panel members to ask their questions. And
thank you, Chair. Thank you for your submissions. I want to just put to you some of the statements that we've been told by community members and residents in Alex themselves. So the Chair has already indicated sort of some of these questions, but I want to ask on a more granular level about these submissions from the community that we've heard. So residents of Alex have submitted to us as a commission that EFF members who are resident or active in Alexandra Township are on a daily basis encouraging people to occupy land in Alex, and that occupation is perceived by those residents to be compounding factors that create human rights infringements. So I'd like you to just respond to those submissions from the residents that we've received with either your views, your perceptions, and what your position is on those. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think we've stated already, without any contradiction, that land occupation is an EFF program. And therefore, if EFF members are reiterating an EFF program, which is duly adopted through a constitutional process such as the 2014 National People's Assembly, where the program was officially adopted, and of course in the founding manifesto, which predates the National Assembly, that EFF members are acting on an instruction which is based on our revolutionary course as an organization. I want to just add a little bit more clarity there, because I'm assuming you wanted me to confirm that if community members or EFF members are pursuing programs to occupy land, they are not doing it out of their own arbitrary, prerogative, but because the EFF program is as it is. And of course, we reiterated even in the excerpt that I read to you that it is based on the need, and of course the historical context of dispossession and landlessness, and the fact that people in Gauteng generally do not have houses. I must stress to you that the same people you spoke to should have, and I would have expected them to do so, told you that they've been sitting with what is called C-forms. C-forms is a form that you receive from the Department of Human Settlements or through the province and the municipality working together when you apply for a house because you cannot afford to get a bond, or you do not qualify for a bond. And so they've been sitting with these C-forms, majority of them since 1996 to date, and remain homeless and live in shacks, in backyards and all of that. As you know, majority Alex homes are actually informal, because the majority of the actual households in Alexandra are living in informal dwellings known as shacks inside yards under extremely squashed conditions, even on street pavements. And so the position of occupying land is also based on a couple of issues, which is one, there's a lot of land across the province that has been lying naked for decades, and people are aware of it. And every time they ask the government, Department of Human Settlements, why they are not getting houses, they are told there's no land. And yet people know they live next to vacant land. Right next to Alexandra, there's another piece of vacant land which is allegedly owned by vets. And the EFF leadership has approached the regional chairs. Here he can confirm it for you. Vets University initially to negotiate that land be given to people. And Vets has been very cagey about it. I'm making an example with the Vets land because it's right next to the area where the demolitions were across the main road and the Gautrain rail station. But just lastly on that one is that we do find it very strange that people ask the kind of questions they ask about why people of Alexandra and other areas are occupying land, when the poverty and desperation in Alexandra is obvious and it has reached desperate situations. But more than anything else, like I said earlier in my opening remarks, the entire Alexandra is based on informal occupation. In fact, the history of black people, you would know Soweto has got the same history, where the size of Soweto was not designed to be what it is today. It expanded beyond the initial Orlando, east, to Middlelands and beyond, through land occupation. And all other areas, in fact, of the townships would be established by either the pre-apartheid state or the apartheid state, but its expansion would be based on land occupation, based on need. Because workers would come, they would be given a small area, black workers, to stay in. The area would be inadequate, and it would therefore force people to occupy, because they would be subjected to very squashed conditions which are inhumane. And it's not necessary to keep explaining that. But we find that we always have to explain that black people are living under inhumane conditions. And we don't understand why we have to explain that, because everyone knows what an inhumane condition is. But I also wanted to add finally, in response to your question, that, and also add on to my initial inputs posed by the chair, that the situation on Friday was so desperate, like I said. People's possessions were squashed and demolished and destroyed and even stolen by the Red Ants, by the way, and I'm sure they told you that, the community. That we had to organize from all sorts of people in society that could help us, blankets, food. We even had to force the municipality to also ask the Disaster Relief Division of the Metro, of Johannesburg Metro, to bring tents, just so that people can have basic shelter and all of that. Why am I raising it now under the context of your question? Because the people there are extremely poor. Unlike maybe you and I, if I find myself with my house demolished, I might be able to go and live with my sister. She might come and pick me up in her car. The people there don't have those kinds of, they come from generational poverty. So when their house is demolished, and their personal possessions, their clothes, food, the last bit of food they had, they live from hand to mouth. Those are people who earn between 1,500 and 2,000 a month if they're lucky. So they don't have excess food, they don't have excess savings, they don't have anything else, they live from hand to mouth. And so I'm raising that because I want to paint a proper picture in the context of your question, that we are dealing with generations of poverty. We are not dealing with someone who's poor because they became a drug addict and became an outcast in their family and the family kicked them out. No. They inherited poverty from their parents inherited it from their grandparents inherited it from their great-grandparents. So I want to leave it at that.
Thank you for your submission. So is the perception of residents of Alex, these residents that you are referring to and describing to me here, that the activity of occupation being encouraged in Alex is particularly intense in that specific area, is that a correct perception or is that a misperception on behalf of the community?
I think I need you to just paraphrase it. I have a certain understanding, but if you can repeat it for me, please. And if I can also ask that I confer with the Joburg Regional Chair if he wants to add anything after what I would have said.
Not a problem. There is a perception amongst the residents of Alex that the encouragement of occupation by EFF representatives or those who purport to be EFF representatives within the community is particularly intense in Alexandra Township as compared to other areas in Gauteng province. What would you say to that perception? Do you think that that is a misperception, or do you think that there is an activity there because of the specific conditions in Alex, some of which you've alluded to already?
No, definitely it's a misperception because we have land occupation programs. By the way, they were not started by the EFF. I need to correct that. Like I've explained before, majority townships, not just in Gauteng, expanded to the sizes they are based on land occupation and need. And squashed conditions that black people would find themselves under. They have growing families like any other person, so they would occupy, and eventually, after many struggles, the local authorities would be forced to come and formalize those occupied areas. And I mentioned Soweto as a very classical example, which we all boast about as the largest township, I think, in the country. But we forget that it is the largest township based on land occupation, which was classified as illegal even during apartheid. So it's not true that Alexandra is peculiar. It's not. I can give you many examples now. Here in Johannesburg, and the regional chairperson of Joburg may add if you permit him. But let me speak for the other regions. There's 5 regions in the province, made up of 11 municipalities, 2 of whom are districts, so in reality, 9 geographic municipalities. And across all those municipalities, there are land occupation programs. By the way, not only led by the EFF, led by community organizations who often establish steering committees, led even by members of and leaders from the African National Congress. And I say that boldly because I've addressed community meetings before where we have occupied land and led land occupation, and there were ANC members there. One such example is in Ward 5 in Johannesburg, in Orange Farm, where I addressed the community, and when I arrived, EFF members were very agitated and saying, you can't address ANC members. And I said, no, I'm a member of provincial legislature. I may not discriminate against communities and constituencies based on their political party affiliation. And there was a leader, a local leader of the ANC, who addressed the meeting before me. Me and him were standing together at the back of the back, where there was occupation in that area. And the occupation has now been formalized. There's also another one, I can give you an example, in an area now known as Jovicho, in Ward 122 or 121, Lenasia South, where, again, we had to go and intervene because there was a similar situation of demolishing, but there they demolished informal settlements. The point I'm making is that in that occupation, there were SANCO representatives, there were ANC representatives, there were community members who had formed a steering committee alongside the EFF, and we worked together with them. Why? The excerpt I read for you in the founding manifesto says, we will not limit ourselves to people's organizational formations. We will do our work and pursue our cause on the basis of the needs of primarily African populations in this country that are finding themselves in dire situations. And just the last thing I wanted to add is that the land occupations are very organized, by the way, just for your added information. They are not haphazardly done. They may look like they're haphazard because if you are privileged and you've never had to occupy a piece of land for you to get shelter, you can't relate to it. Because you go to the bank, you apply for a bond, they give you, you move, you get a moving truck, you pay it. But if you've never, ever had that privilege and you've got nowhere to stay, you are forced by circumstances to find shelter for you and your family. And so our communities, like I said, for time immemorial, dating back to the days of James Sofasonke Mpanza and the Alexandra situation, which I mentioned in my brief, have had to organize themselves outside of the formal government processes to occupy land. So they have a steering committee, they have an allocation committee, we even do a database. And that database in the current days, in the current era, post-96, are always based primarily on the C forms, which I mentioned, so that we regulate that it's not an arbitrary, occupation, that it is legitimate, it's people who have a need, and we can prove it. And often we even pursue engagements with the government, whether at local level or provincial level, to say, look, we need this land and all of that. So it's normally a very last, but well-organized last resort. Thank you. Yeah, I'm okay. I don't think he needs to add. Thank you.
I'm going to also introduce another submission that we received, also on behalf of the residents, also noting, of course, that there are different classes of residents in Alexandra as well, so take that with that what you will. During our inspection in Alex, there were submissions made to us that one of the underlying causes of the lack of bylaw enforcement is a byproduct of the City of Johannesburg's inability to resolve political tensions arising out of the coalition and local government, which is made up of the Democratic Alliance and the Economic Freedom Fighters. Specifically, that the EFF is pro-land occupation and its coalition partner, the DA, therefore tolerates or turns a blind eye to illegal occupations in Alexandra. Please, could you give us your response to that submission?
Thank you. Firstly, it's common knowledge that the EFF is not in a coalition with any other organization, let alone the Democratic Alliance. Let me reiterate the EFF's decision after the 2016 local government elections. I won't go into too much detail, save to just summarize it as follows, and I welcome the national spokesperson to add if he wishes. But that the EFF took a decision democratically and centrally. As you know, our core management principle, if I can use that language that you understand, is based on democratic centralism. That the EFF will vote in all municipalities around the country that are hung with opposition parties, not with the Democratic Alliance, with opposition parties. And therefore, we did that in KZN, several municipalities that were hung. We did that in the Eastern Cape. We did that in the Free State. We did that here in Gauteng. So I just wanted to give you background, because there's a misconception, and it must be, we must help society to understand how this democracy is rolling out from here onwards, and how our participation is helping to deepen the democracy. And I believe, in my own personal view, that the EFF's position was very helpful towards helping all of us understand democracy better. Because remember, just because we became used to a majority rule situation from 94 doesn't mean that that's the only way to govern. When elections outcomes come out and they don't give anybody a majority, other options have to be pursued by the people who were then voted for. And a coalition is one option, but there are other options. Let me leave it at that. So we are not in a coalition with the DA. We voted with the IFP in KZN. We voted with Forum for Service Delivery, I think, in Metsimahulu, in Free State. We voted with, I think it was DA, I stand corrected, in Nelson Mandela Bay, just to give you better clarity. So it's not like we particularly went out of our way to vote with the DA. A last point on that one is that the decision, the central decision to go for that option was based on demands that the EFF gave to both the African National Congress nationally and the Democratic Alliance after they approached the EFF to say, here's the elections outcome, none of us got a majority, we want to talk to you, to give us your votes. And then negotiations ensued, and as I said, the central decision was taken, and the organization chose to not be in coalition with anyone and rather vote with opposition parties that were next in line after the governing party to run those municipalities for obvious reasons, because of corruption, etc., lack of service delivery, which is what brought you here, the lack of houses and all of that. That has been a decades-old problem. Let me come to now the question about the EFF, which is similar to your earlier question in my understanding. But let me deal with the part of the bylaws. It would be, I would expect you to also get more inputs from the municipality, but I would find it strange that residents of Alexandra are concerned about lack of application of certain bylaws now only. When in fact, like I've stated earlier, we all know what Alexandra looks like. We all know how Alexandra, people put up houses for themselves, informal dwellings. And they've been doing it, like I said, since 1904. And so in 1994, when a black government, which purports to be democratic, took over the state democratically, there was a natural expectation that top priority would be given to areas like Alexandra. And that bylaws that talk to proper settlement and, and all of that would be, one, amended, adjusted accordingly, because remember, bylaws were not always suitable for black communities. They were always designed to benefit white communities, Indian communities, and then colored communities to another extent, according to what was the Separate Development Act and the discriminatory, racial discrimination of how to beneficiate communities in a sliding scale, with whites being number one and then coloreds or Indians being number two and coloreds number three. So, and then black people getting the scraps, if there were any. So I'm saying that it's difficult to answer that question because I don't know in which context the residents said it, but my concern would be the residents should have answered that question or should have raised that issue in the context of the duration of the existence of a black government, for instance, before the last 2 years of the government under the DA that the EFF voted with. Not to say that there's no responsibility on anyone who's governing. We have put on record a lot of pressure on the DA. We have put immense pressure on the DA here in Gauteng, in both Tshwane and Johannesburg, to deliver urgent things, to the extent that the Red Ants, the usage of the Red Ants company became a motion of council. I'll ask the Joburg chair to clarify for us the date, but in the first year, immediately after the swearing in and establishment of a local government, a council, it was, I think, the first motion or one of the first motions that the EFF presented to council to say, we do not want the usage of the Red Ants for obvious reasons. It's inhumane, it's unconstitutional often in terms of how they go about their business, and it's arbitrary, and it is actually targeted. The Red Ants is purely targeted at destabilizing black communities who are desperate for a place to stay, because the Red Ants have never, according to my knowledge, you can prove me wrong, ever evicted or demolished a white person's house. They've never evicted and demolished an Indian person's house. I'm saying in my knowledge and in my history and our experience as the EFF on the ground, we have never come across communities from the privileged racial groups who have complained that the Red Ants have treated them like pigs, the way they treat our people. So that is my last point, which is to say the resolution was taken by council that the Red Ants contract must be reviewed, and then the usage of the Red Ants must cease. And then any necessary eviction which is legally approved by a court of law must be taken right up to the mayor's office through all the structures, but it must end with the mayor's office to be assessed whether it is a correct action and whether the city's responsibilities according to the PI Act, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and where, prior to implementation of evictions, but that without any discussion, the Red Ants must no longer be used because of the trail of disaster and even deaths that they leave behind in communities, and even rapes for that matter. You would know that there were many women who opened cases against the Red Ants after being evicted of rape during evictions.
Thank you for your answer. Chair, I don't have any further questions at this point.
Thank you very much for your submissions. I just want to pick up on the last point that you have made about the EFF's experience on the ground insofar as evictions are concerned and the conduct of the Red Ants in particular. And I just want you to reflect on your experiences over the past weekend as a result of the evictions in Alex, and perhaps also draw on your experience in other areas where community members have been evicted after having occupied land, quote-unquote, illegally. Is the EFF perhaps considering going back to the drawing board and reconsidering how it calls for land occupation in line with the manifesto you read out to us? I say this because as much as, yes, we recognize that there is a need for redistribution of land in South Africa, the way in which it has been done in the past under the ruling party and most recently with the advent of the EFF having called for land occupations, the response of the state is always an aggressive one to land occupation. And what I want you to consider, and what I'm asking you is, with that experience in mind, is the EFF now thinking perhaps instead of just outright calling for occupation of land, perhaps there needs to be more tact in that request, because the ultimate people who suffer as a result of those calls are poor, marginalized people. You said it yourself that you saw people's property being destroyed, theft of property, people being shot at. All of these were poor black people who your party says it advocates for. So in light of that, is the EFF reconsidering how it calls for land occupation?
Firstly, I'm not authorized to make decisions on the EFF in a setting such as this one, and as an individual. The EFF takes its decisions in constitutional settings. And one such setting is coming up later this year, which is the National People's Assembly, which is our national conference, in your understanding. We call our conferences assemblies. So I cannot answer that question. Only delegates representing branches of the EFF duly elected in branch people's assemblies and who have duly convened in a conference can take such a decision or review anything. So I cannot answer that question. But I want to address the comment that, as part of the question, that because the state always responds with aggression, are we considering, and I've already answered the first part, the former aspect of your question. It is extremely worrying that you would even ask such a question, with all due respect. And through the chairperson, I must register my disappointment for that question, because I believe that if you are representing the Human Rights Commission, you should always ask your questions or engage us from the point of view of human rights, not from the point of view of the aggressor, who then violates human rights. It's like asking me, if I get raped, what would I do to avoid getting raped? There's no other way I can answer you, because I'll be very long-winded if I have to properly answer you. But I want to draw a parallel for you, and I'm happy you are a female and you are black, because you can relate to the amount of violence that black women are confronted with in South Africa. So I'm making a direct comparison of your question, and then saying that I don't feel that it's necessary for me to answer it on the basis of my interpretation of what you're asking. That when there's an aggressor who has got guns with bullets and vehicles and tear gas and stun grenades and authority given to it, that state, by the people, right? And they come and direct all that violence and aggression and those weapons against the same people who elected them. That the people must be asked what can they do to improve their living conditions, but do it in such a way that they don't invite aggression from the state. I'm worried about that question. It's no different to asking me if I'm raped, like I said. What would I do to avoid the rape?
With all due respect, I don't agree that it's the same. The question I was asking is that you were there in Alex this past weekend when the evictions were happening. You were fired, according to your testimony, with rubber bullets. You saw the panic and mayhem and the trauma visited upon those very people that you were there representing. My question to you was, in light of that experience, because you were there experiencing it on Saturday, but we know for a fact, every year, seasonally, people get evicted. It's a fact. This is the state's modus operandi. Eviction orders are usually executed in the winter months when it's cold. People's properties are thrown out in the street and they're left to suffer alone. You were there this time when people were being evicted. And I'm asking you, in light of that experience, maybe not in your capacity as an EFF member, but in your capacity as someone who experienced that, having seen that and having felt that trauma, would you think it would be appropriate to perhaps even start discussions about perhaps changing tact? I'm not saying you need to account for the aggressor. I'm not saying you need to create ways in which you are not violated, because sometimes that's beyond your control. But in your capacity as someone who went through that, do you think it would be appropriate to start considering it? And also, wearing your hat as a leader in the EFF, when you speak, your words have effect on your listeners. If you call for occupation of land, the assumption is that as a leader you have come up with a plan to ensure that the consequences of that land invasion may be mitigated. So now, having that authority puts you in a very powerful position in society. And this is why I'm asking you to consider, or I'm asking if you have considered whether or not maybe that tact needs to be changed.
Okay, I must firstly state that it is not my intention to create an argument, but to respond as best as I can, like I stated in the beginning, and then reiterate that it's only a conference of the EFF that can take decisions to review positions. But maybe I should add that the excerpt that I read from the founding manifesto is not going to be changed. That I can tell you up front without consulting a conference. Because the founding manifesto of the EFF is a permanent document. It's like a Bible. It will never be changed. It can have additions to it in different forms, like in elections, manifestos, etc., expanded positions, and when we develop policy, etc., etc. But itself, as it were, it will not be changed. So even a cannot change a founding manifesto. However, it can make other policy positions. But I've stated that I can't answer that question because I'm not a conference of the EFF. But maybe I should answer my question this way to you. Did you believe that you as a South African citizen, if you are a South African citizen, or an African for that matter, it's okay because our struggle is an African one. Would you at some point have believed that after the African National Congress was formed in 1912, at some point, based on the state violence that was meted out against people as they were fighting for both land and the right to vote and basically, to be recognized as human beings in this country, that based on the amount of state violence that some of us grew up watching and witnessing, and people that we have lost in our families, that the ANC should have stopped their fight towards the independence of this country? Do you believe that at some point, based on the violence, like I said, the ANC should have stopped their underground tactics, and even further that in I think it was 60 or 63, when the Mkhonto weSizwe was formed by former President Nelson Mandela through the Luthuli detachment, that they shouldn't have formed Mkhonto weSizwe?
No, I think we can't undo history. That's done and dusted. And yes, that approach might have been a response to prevailing conditions at the time. These are the prevailing conditions of our time right now. And what I'm asking you is whether or not, with this view in mind, and as a leader, having an aerial view of the situation across the country, because you said it yourself, that land occupations are not only limited to Alexandra. But if we were going to take Alexandra as a peculiar case on its own, with limited land, with people occupying dangerous pieces of land, we heard yesterday from various people in the city of Johannesburg that people living in Situatla, specifically on the flood line, are at risk because, yes, they're desperate for housing, yes, they're desperate for accommodation, but unfortunately, they're placing themselves in high-risk areas because of their desperation. And the question I'm asking you to consider is, in light of that fact, in light of the fact that when you say to people, when you see an empty piece of land, occupy it, you're not qualifying it with, provided it's not on a flood line where you might put your life at risk, because the EFF will not be there to rescue those people when there's a flood. And the question I'm asking you to consider, which you're telling me you are not authorized to do right now, and I accept, but I believe you have a voice in those platforms, and it's something that you can put forward as a suggestion. The question I'm asking you to consider is, perhaps in calling for land occupations, we need to be more circumspect about how and where it's done.
I think I need to clarify you that we are going to intensify the struggle for our land to be returned to our people. I must emphasize that to you because I tried to make a practical example by asking you the question about the struggle against the apartheid regime. In fact, even the pre-apartheid regime, because the ANC was formed in 1912, not 1948. And I thought maybe you would understand where I'm going with it. But it's clear you didn't understand, so let me reiterate. We will intensify our struggle for land expropriation without compensation until it is equally redistributed to our people. And then lastly, I want to comment that I explained how formal sort of the land occupation processes are. I also explained that land occupation is not an invention of the EFF. It's an invention of black people's struggles based on all the unjust laws that were promulgated by the imperialist British regime prior to apartheid and intensified by the apartheid National Party regime against black people to dispossess us permanently, not just of land, but of economic, social, and cultural rights. In fact, the right to just live, because if you don't have land, you can't live. So, on behalf of the people you are talking about, I take exception that you think that when people occupy land, they don't consider the conditions of that land. I take exception to that. Alexandra and Situatla being located inside the Jukskei River is a situation that is historical. It's not Extension 5 Silvertown occupants who occupied on the river bank there for the first time. It's been like that. Maybe you need to go there. Maybe you need to go and interview the people right there, not here, call them here, so that you can see what I'm talking about, and ask them. I gave you historical background of how Alexandra was formed, and you seem not to have an appreciation for that. I even mentioned that across the road behind the Mvagwe Gautrain rail station, track, there's a big piece of land that Wits purports to own, that Wits is refusing to give back to us or to the municipality or government to build houses. And you continue in your approach to ask a question that is anti-people, anti-black people, that says that black people are occupying land because they've got nothing better to do. And I've explained myself at great lengths what leads the people to that condition.
We have been to Silvertown. We've spoken to people there. We know the history and the origins of Silvertown. We know where those people came from, and we know that promises were made to those people which were never fulfilled. We also know about the land in Frankenwald, which is the land you're referring to, that Wits owns. And we know that there are things being discussed about that land which have been underway for a number of years. So we're well aware of the historical context and the current deliberations that are happening in Alexandra. The issue that I wanted you to clarify was whether you would be amending, changing, tweaking your tact. And from your response, it's clear that you are not going to change, despite the violence that has been perpetuated against the people that occupy land. And I understand that. My next question relates to the eviction itself. Do you have any recollection of evictions ever being discussed, specifically around areas in Alexandra in council? Was there ever any motions brought? Was there ever any resolutions passed around what happens with people who have occupied land that is deemed unsafe, or where eviction orders have been granted but were pended?
Can I confer with the regional chairperson because he serves in the council? Okay, thanks. According to our chairperson, and also information I shared earlier about the resolution of council, there was a resolution of council that was adopted that any evictions that will be carried out in Johannesburg must strictly be carried out in line with the provisions fully of the PI Act, the Prevention of Illegal Evictions Act. And that, secondly, there must be alternative accommodation for people who are evicted legally through a court eviction, which is legal. And that lastly, that the 90-day period which is stipulated in the PI Act must be observed in terms of the process, in terms of the notice to evict. So if you are going to be evicted, you must have been notified 90 days prior to the actual eviction taking place, and then the municipality also, in line with that, must have provided you with alternative accommodation so that on the day of your eviction you have already got alternative accommodation. Like I said, the full application of the PI Act must be observed, and that's what Council has adopted under the guidance of the EFF motion that was presented.
When was this motion presented?
(29 and 30 November 2017) in a council meeting of the City of Johannesburg.
And to your recollection, was the municipal manager aware of this resolution?
I would imagine he would have to be.
You mentioned earlier that when you went to Alex, you spoke to an official in the JMPD and you wanted to find out whether or not there was a court order authorizing the demolitions of the property. And you said that they couldn't answer you regarding the court order. Did they mention on what authority they were demolishing the properties?
No.
And then you mentioned to my colleague in response to a question, she asked that you're not in coalition with the DA, but you vote with the opposition. Could you give us an idea of the nature of your relationship with the DA-led administration in the City of Johannesburg? Would you consider it a cordial one? Is there cooperation? When you make motions, are they well received? Can you just give us a picture of how that relationship is?
The EFF remains opposition in all councils in the province, and we remain opposition even in the provincial legislature as well as parliament, and our relationship is governed by our duties as an opposition party.
Thank you, ma'am, for your submissions. So I have two questions, Chair. Yesterday we had a submission from the city manager regarding the demolitions in Alexandra, that the structures were incomplete, that the structures that were demolished were incomplete. Can you, in your view, perhaps confirm as to whether these structures that were demolished were incomplete and whether there were actually people in those structures?
We compiled a database of all affected families, and we concluded at 163. We submitted this report to the Public Protector as well as the Human Rights Commission when we lodged our formal complaints on Monday and on Tuesday. And that proves that the structures were not all incomplete. In my recollection, and I stand to be corrected, there were 163 structures.
Not 80?
Sorry, no. There were more than 163 structures. Yeah? Because we have a database that we have compiled with the community that is verified with them of the 163 houses that had been occupied already with furniture and everything. Like I mentioned earlier, people lost furniture, fridges, even documents, IDs, etc. We've also written a letter, by the way, I think it was on Friday or Monday morning, we wrote a letter to Home Affairs to ask them to take a mobile truck as urgently as possible to the area. And we are still to hear from the provincial head of Home Affairs to go and make sure that they help the citizens to replace documents and all of that, marriage certificates, IDs, birth certificates, etc. And then, of course, there's the additional crisis of children who have lost school books, and we've got all of that information that we're compiling. And we're doing that with the community as well as one of our PR councillors from Johannesburg who's responsible for that constituency. So it's not true that the structures were not occupied. Some were not. The 163 are the households that we traced. But there were about, maybe, I'm estimating, between 30 and 40 structures in terms of the report we received that were still under construction. But I confirmed 163 that had a household head.
Thank you for that. Could you, with the lady who made a phone call to you, could you confirm as to whether she ever received a notice for eviction?
I can safely say no, but I'm happy to confirm with her because I have her number. I'm happy to officially confirm with her because I didn't officially ask her. Because remember what I explained that earlier, when we tried to convene a community meeting a couple of times on Friday, it was we were disrupted, and our meetings were violently dispersed by the police. However, we did hold meetings throughout Saturday and Sunday with the community to give feedback on relief assistance and all sorts of things. And we have confirmation that no one from the community, that's why I can confirm that from her, and I'm happy to give you her number, from the caller, the resident who made the call, that she also would not have had notification. Maybe I can add, the only thing that the community told us that comes slightly close to some kind of notification is the fact that they reported that I think a week prior to the demolitions, there were men who would come now and then into the area, take pictures. They described that there were several white men, and I'm not sure why they emphasized the race, but they mentioned that there were several white men who were not police officers, but because they would come with police officers. And they would also come with other people from around Alexandra that they know, whom they are familiar with, who work at the housing department. And those names we submitted as well to the public protector when we lodged the complaint, and to the Human Rights Commission, that they would come with some employees of the housing department from the municipality who work for Sub-Region E housing department, to come and walk around, take pictures and leave, and they would approach these people and ask them, what's going on, why are you here, and they wouldn't get any coherent response.
Thank you for that. My final question. You did mention in your oral submission that there was a motion of council that the red ants usage would be reviewed and the contract stopped. I'd like to find out what has happened to that resolution, and with the private security industry regulatory authority, have you any knowledge as to whether it has ever investigated the conduct of red ants, not only in Alexandra but in other areas?
Can I confer with the Joburg chairperson and party leader there in the metro, just on the first part of the question, please? Thank you for your patience. The resolution was particularly, I think we refer to it as the red ends because evictions are normally, sort of implemented through using the red ends. But it was the motion that I referred to earlier, which the Joburg chairperson confirmed was adopted in November 2017 in the sitting of the council on the 29th and 30th, which was in relation to evictions in general, and which was based on full application of the PI Act. We are not, the Johannesburg region and ourselves in the province have never been engaged by any representatives of the security industry on the red ends. The only thing that I could say, in fact it's not related, but sometime in 2014 or 2015, I was once invited to a debate on evictions because we were seized with a lot of evictions then, at a time when we were seized with a lot of evictions, as the party leader and at the time acting chairperson of the province. And in that debate, there was a discussion, it was on Power FM, and the discussion was about evictions, and the participants in the debate were myself, the CEO of the Red Ants, Johan Bosch, and the then MMC for housing in Johannesburg, because there was a lot of evictions here in Johannesburg, and we had taken a certain posture on the evictions. And in that conversation, I remember us raising the question to Johan Bosch, because the context of him being invited to the debate by Power FM was that the provincial government at the time was denying that they had a contract with the Red Ants when we had posed questions to them in the legislature. And we then discovered that they were lying because we asked questions and we looked for accounting information, and we received statements of invoices that were paid by various departments of the provincial government to the Red Ants company. And so those claims we had made to the media, and the media had invited Johan Bosch to confirm or deny that he had contacts with the provincial government, and also to confirm and deny that he had contacts with the city of Joburg. And part of that discussion involved a discussion about whether the security industry, in its formation, has, some form of regulatory positions or policy positions on evictions and their conduct during evictions, etc., etc. That's the only thing, and it was not really a formal, it was just a radio debate, but we've had no other engagements with the industry, the security industry, on evictions, and particularly on the red ends.
Thank you so much, that will be all.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning to the entire EFF participants as led by the provincial leader, Mandisa Mashiko. My name is Vusumuz Lamin. I'm from the Office of the Public Protector. First, I want to just bring to your attention that a number of state institutions have already appeared before this commission, and they have been probed about the extent to which they have rolled out their services to the people of Alexandra as mandated by the Constitution. But upon being probed, a number of concerns were raised by them as, amongst other things, constituting obstacles or presenting them with challenges towards providing the people of Alex with certain services that they have a duty to provide to them in terms of the Constitution. I'm talking about the provision of housing, provision of bulk infrastructure, and other related municipal services. Amongst the challenges that they raised, and as they relate to you as a EFF, was the concern that currently in Alex there is a widespread occupation of land, or rather unlawful occupation of land that is taking place. And according to the submission by these institutions, such unlawful occupation of land is being supported or encouraged by certain political movements. Now, we all know that currently Economic Freedom Fighters is the most strident and a vocal political movement, especially when it comes to issues of land occupation, expropriation, distribution, and economic transformation. And we have also just confirmed to this commission that land occupation is indeed the program of the EFF. I think it is along those bases that this commission has decided to extend its invitation to the EFF. And more so in the spirit of all the Ataram Patem rule, to hear your side of the story with regard to the challenges that are faced by certain institutions when it comes to providing the services to the people of Alexandra. I was just laying that background, but now I'll just go to the question now. My first question will be to say, would you confirm to this commission if the EFF has ever at any stage called upon people to occupy a particular piece of land in and around Alexandra, or supported any occupation of such land in and around Alexandra?
Okay, first I'd like you to explain the Latin term you used because I'm not a lawyer.
Oh, no, by Autalam Patem, I simply mean that our invitation that we extended to you was simply to give you an opportunity to respond to these challenges that were raised by this state institution as being obstacles to their delivery of the services to the people. So we are giving you an opportunity to rebut or confirm those challenges, if at all you are part of the obstacles that impedes them from delivering the services to the people of Alexandra, as it were. So in brief, we are giving you an opportunity to present yourself with regard to the issue of occupation of land, the alleged unlawful occupation of land in Alexandra.
Thank you for that explanation. I just want to reiterate that our program is land occupation, not unlawful land occupation. And just add that you would understand that in the context of historical dispossession of Africans, that it's a cause of, it's a fight for justice, land justice, economic justice, as I've explained. And therefore, fighting against an unjust law. What is the unjust law? It's Section 25 of the Constitution that says that for black people to get land for primary use, they must purchase that land. When they cannot afford to purchase the land through the state, and also further that when it was taken from them initially, it was taken without any contract, without any agreement, and worst of all, it was taken very violently. And it was not taken over a year, it was taken over a couple of centuries. In fact, it continues to be taken to date. It's a pity because I must confine myself to your questions. I could open up a new discussion for you that proves that there are particularly white people in our province and other provinces who actually take land without paying for it. They simply come and put a fence around it and say, this is my land. And because of white privilege and black people being so scared of whites, they won't even ask, is this your land? And then, of course, the corruption that happens at the deeds office. You know about the corruption at the deeds office. You have received many complaints that it has become very difficult to work out, who owns what. But secondly, I want to also add that the Land and Rural Affairs Department did, I think in partnership with the Deeds Office, did a land audit. And I think the final, in preparation for the public participation process into the Constitutional Review Committee to look at the motion that, the EFF motion that Parliament adopted for land expropriation without compensation. There was a report released that indicated the dire condition of lack of land for black people. That report is publicly available for everyone. That demonstrated that black people only had around 4% of the land, when black people in South Africa are way in excess of 40 million. And so it is with that background that I want to state that, yes, land occupation, not unlawful, but land occupation in the course of the fight for land is an EFF program, and we are not shy about that, and we've stated it many times. And I've also, when I responded to your honorable colleague, Mrs. Siboto, that we will intensify that struggle. It's not likely to get easier for anyone until we attain what we believe the people deserve. So challenges that the municipality or various state institutions are claiming they have in relation to service delivery are just an insult to all of us. Because if they are claiming that the EFF's land occupation program is blocking them from delivering services, It's the most ridiculous thing you can ever even listen to, because the EFF was formed on the 26th of July, 2013. White people arrived in South Africa in 1652 and started taking our land. The ANC took over government through a democratic vote in 1994. If you subtract 94 to 2013, you will get a result. There was no EFF there that they can claim blocked them. And throughout the land dispossession phases of this country over the last 376 years, black people have been forced to occupy land, like I explained previously. And history will absolve me if you read the history of how Soweto grew and all other townships. It will tell you clearly that Soweto grew as a result of land occupation and all other, if not majority, of black townships. And so that's all I can say. People are looking for excuses not to do their work. People are looking for excuses to loot our people's money instead of using it very fast for services. The last point that I want to raise on that issue is that when we came with the other leadership and some PR councillors and other members of EFF to the affected area on Friday, we started making contact with the leadership of the municipality in Joburg to ask them to ask disaster relief, the EMS, emergency medical services, as well as disaster relief, to come and assist us with basic things. When we made a call to other citizens to ask for blankets and food and basic clothes, disaster relief was able to bring those things. Late at night, I left Alexandra on Friday at around midnight and still left other leaders there. From just sheer exhaustion, I had to go and then returned in the morning. When I left, I had received confirmation from the acting head of disaster management that they are on their way. They've gone to a warehouse to pick up certain items, and they are now on their way back to Alexandra. And I had to link them up with people who were there for the distribution so that it's not a reckless distribution. Therefore, I'm saying that to prove that the state is capable of delivering services, that the EFF and its land occupation and the People's Land Occupation Program, which we as the EFF inherited from them in 2013, which has been there for centuries, can never and has never ever stopped any government entity from delivering services.
Thanks. But maybe I think I should give a bit of a context, because if maybe those institutions are listening to my line of questioning at the moment, they won't be pleased if I don't give the context under which they raise those challenges. In the main, it was alleged that the call for land occupation, and I'm going to deliberately avoid using the word unlawful, the call for land occupation results in informal settlement, and in areas that are environmentally sensitive, which as a municipality or provincial departments who has a duty to roll out the services to the people are not able to rezone those areas, because more often than not, those areas are flood-prone areas. It's areas that are encumbered maybe along road and railway servitude, under high voltage lines, unstable land, or sometimes outside development boundary, and areas that pose a health and safety hazard to the people themselves. But in short, the concern is that the areas that are often occupied as a result of such calls are areas that are not suitable for housing development and formal infrastructure. Now, I had you gave a proper example of a development of Soweto, and in particular Orlando, the land occupation that was led by the late iconic James Sofasonke Mpanza. and we all know for the fact now that Soweto is a big, fully developed urban area. But now if you juxtapose that against the context that I have given, I'm sure Soweto is not a environmentally sensitive area. It was such an area that it could be developed. So why I'm saying that, I'm saying the call for land occupation, which is your program, before you embark on such, do you conduct some form of feasibility study on the area so that, for example, if there is a need for a municipality to roll out the bulk infrastructure to such areas, it is practical and feasible in the circumstances?
Thank you. I did mention earlier that when communities occupy land, and I stressed that they'd been doing it for decades, if not centuries, in fact, right? And as times moved on, in the latter years, they organized themselves and even approach, even from ward councillor to human settlements departments, etc., up to MECs and even premiers, to say, here we are so many, we've got C forms, or we live in the area, we are working here, we need a place to stay, help us. That's normally the way how it starts. That's why communities often can even tell you how many times or how often they've engaged with MECs, MMCs, ward councillors, PR councillors, etc., to find out. In fact, even at times they engage with private landowners if it's a farm. They would have formal meetings with so-called the farm owner or the mine or any other sort of wealthy people who have taken vast amounts of lands for themselves in South Africa, and will engage with them and say, please, we need a place to stay. Can you give us this part? Can't afford to pay for it, etc., etc. So that's the answer to that part of your question. That people settle in environmentally sensitive places, and you've made an example of Soweto, which is my example, and whether we have, as EFF, access to use experts, maybe even town planners, geologists, and all sorts of other experts. No, we don't have those kinds of resources. If we had, we'd be running government, because those are the resources you need to run government. We don't have those kinds of resources, like we can't afford them. We as the EFF, and I can confirm for you that the communities we are talking about can't afford them either. We use common knowledge, they use common knowledge and understanding. But I must also add that Alexandra has been there since 1904. The ANC took over in 94, Alexandra was there. The DA took over in 2016, Alexandra was there. Whose responsibility is it to move the people? The people are not opposed to being moved from Alex. We must never create the impression that Alexandra residents are excited about living in Alexandra. Just because they smile every day and they go about their business, they have parties, they have funerals, weddings. Human beings are like that. Africans are resilient people. We have to survive. But the government has never taken, the same people you interviewed, they've never taken the initiative to say, look, here's a plan, we're going to move you to there. In fact, the only thing I can tell you that I know for a fact, and you can ask him when you call him here, is that Paul Mashatile was the first MEC for human settlements, for housing here after the ANC took over. And it was during his time that the red ants were first procured by a democratic government to move people from Alexandra to the Diepsloot area. Even before houses were built in Diepsloot, there's a community that we know as the EFF in Diepsloot that can attest to you today. They can even tell you how they were thrown in the back of trucks, open trucks that are used to move gravel and sand during construction. They were thrown into such a truck. Baba Diliza at Diepsloot in an open field. So those same people who told you what they said, that they are blocked and all of that, by EFF and communities who are occupying recklessly in environmentally sensitive areas are the same people who threw people, who displaced people from Alexandra after promising them an RDP house. I can bring those people, I'm not lying. I'm on the ground in this province. I can bring them. The chairperson of Joburg can bring them. Tomorrow we can bring them. And they can come and tell you themselves how they were thrown in an open field by Paul Mashatile, who promised them houses. And when they got there, there was no house, there was no water, there was nothing. They had to find plastics and namazenk and nanani and make a house. And then those people are the ones who mete out state aggression. I mean, who meet state aggression, meted out by the state like that, whom I was earlier asked, should they not reconsider their tactics? So I've got nothing further to say. The state must go and find places. There's a land report. We know the vacant lands. In fact, the same state under the ANC here says that they are doing land rapid release. I don't know what it is, but they keep saying that they are doing it. What it suggests when they say they are doing rapid land release, right? It suggests that they have land to rapidly release. In fact, it even suggests that they've had land since 94, because it's the ANC in the province that says that. They've had land since 1994. They suddenly woke up in 2018 and said, we must rapidly release this land. So why are they allowing the people of Alexandra to continue living like that and in other areas that are dangerous? We agree. We fully agree. It's very urgent that the people of Alexandra must be moved from Alexandra, and it's very urgent that at least vets must release that land so that the city can start building houses.
I may just quickly come in there because for some reason I have some knowledge of the land that you are talking about, the portion of Frankenwald, through my other investigation in the Office of the Public Protector. My understanding is that that portion of Frankenwald was donated to vets, and vets has since sold it to the business community who has earmarked that area for development of a mall. And the city manager of the city of Johannesburg has confirmed that that area is currently being rezoned for that purpose. So it's no longer owned by vets. So vets have sold it to the community, business community. No, I was just raising that one because it's I think that piece of land is off the table as far as I know, but I may be subject to correction. But I think it's a question which we also raised with the city of Johannesburg when they appeared here, and they have confirmed the same. And now going back to my question, it's interesting that you appreciate the fact that a call for land occupation may sometimes be a call to occupation of areas that are not suitable for development or constitute a health hazard to the people themselves, especially around Alex. Because the main contention here is that it's not an opposition to a call for land occupation, but occupation of land in areas that cannot be necessarily developed due to geo underlying and typological challenges. For example, areas that are on the banks of the river, areas that are infested with blue gum trees. You can't expect the municipality to roll out a water reticulation or even construct a house on that area. So maybe while on that one, maybe while on that one, my question will be to ask now that in areas like Stwetla, areas that are on the flood zones, those areas are occupied by people. Would you still say that you support such occupation of land, despite the fact that such areas are not capable of being developed, and they continue to constitute a source of health hazard to the people staying in those areas themselves?
Thank you. On your comment about vets, that's precisely the reason why we're calling for land to be expropriated, because the reckless selling of land for profit interests, especially profit interests of shopping malls, that has been proven not to produce quality jobs for our people is a problem. The state needs to lead development in a responsible way. But let me leave it at that. And I'm not by any means saying that there must be no investment in land. There must be investment and jobs must be created, etc., quality jobs. But to just arbitrarily sell land for profit interest and ignore the living conditions of people is irresponsible. The EFF has never ever called for occupation of land in dangerous areas. We've never done that. We said that we called for land occupation based on the hunger for land that exists. We didn't create that hunger. We are not to blame for colonization and apartheid. We are just trying to fight the remnants of that system as best as we can, and we hope everyone is wanting to join us in that fight. We are not perfect. If citizens have inputs in terms of EFF positions and all of that, we always have stakeholder engagements with citizens and various sectors. They are welcome to do that. And on a daily basis, we receive inputs from citizens where they feel we are not doing the right thing. And we do. We're very democratic. We do take their inputs into consideration. You would know that our manifesto was drafted after extensive consultation with various stakeholders and communities. So we don't do as we wish. We do what people need and want us to do, based on our own, obviously, perspective as a socialist organization as well. So we definitely are not encouraging Stwetla and that part of the Jacques River to be occupied. And we've never done that. Stwetla has always been there before 2013. What we demanded, even in the legislature we demanded from 2014 that people of Alexandra be found a suitable place. We did that many times in the legislature, through either questions to the Premier or questions to the Human Settlements MEC. We've done the same, like I said, in Johannesburg. I mentioned the Wits land because it's vacant and it's next to this place. So it's the easiest to make reference to. But there's many, many other pieces of vacant land in the province. If you go towards the area between Sebokeng and Orange Farm, the Mirafong parts of West Rand, Western area, and where we border Northwest, where we border Ekurhuleni and Mpumalanga, beyond Etwatwa, Davidton, where we border Mpumalanga from Bronkhorstspruit, where we border Northwest from Hammanskraal, where we border Joburg and Pretoria itself, yes, where we border the Northwest again at the back of Winterveld. I'm taking you the entire geographic circumference of the province. And I'm only going to the periphery because those are the areas that we all can relate to. But even internally, there are many pieces of vacant land that have never been used. The point is not whether somebody owns the land. The point is whether the land is being productively used to benefit the citizens of this country, especially the poor black people who have never received a break in 376 years. So it's not true that we've called for reckless occupation, and it's not true that we've asked people to occupy land in the West Rand where the mines have destroyed land, where people's houses are cracking and the government doesn't want to help them. Those kinds of pieces of land, of course, we would never say people must go and live there. Where mines have left unrehabilitated mining areas, I don't even have to go to West Rand, here on the periphery of Meadowlands and Rivali. Go and look at the mining degradation there. Before state officials can come and lecture us about telling people to occupy on dangerous pieces of land, what are they doing about calling the mining companies to come and correct the things they've done to destroy black people's homes around Kagiso, Rivali, Meadowlands, etc., here in Ekurlin, Germiston, and surrounding townships, where because of the blasts and all the mining activity, no one cares, the government doesn't care. They extract the minerals, ship them off, don't even pay the tax on half of them, loot the profits with the private sector, and then they want to come and lecture us about land occupation when there's many, many other things that they are not doing. So we've never said people must occupy land in dangerous places. Why would we say that when we are fighting for people's rights?
Thank you so much for such a comprehensive response. Of course, the call for land occupation, knowing the history of this country and the dispossession of land, it is indeed a noble cause, and it is casually linked to a quest for a roof over people's head, which lies at the constitutional discourse of this country. But then let me just move on to the next question. You indicated that you have visited the area in Alexandra where there has been demolition of houses. That happened I think a week ago. Can you give us an indication, having been on the ground and closer to the situation, as to what kind of structures, housing structures, were demolished? Is it unoccupied houses or is occupied houses? I'm asking that question against the backdrop of an assertion that was made by the City of Johannesburg through the city manager that his understanding is that only unoccupied houses were demolished there and not houses that were occupied by people. So I'm taking advantage of the situation that you have been there on the ground and you observe for yourself. So can you share with this commission if indeed, from what you observe, it's only houses that were unoccupied that were demolished, or if houses that were occupied by people were also demolished?
I confirmed earlier that we have 163 houses that were occupied because we have a database of the occupants, the people who built those houses. And then between 30 and 40 that were still under construction and therefore could not have been occupied. And the only reason we couldn't confirm between 30 and 40 the precise number is because of how the demolition happened. And so we had to then, I think by now the community may have give us a more definitive number because they've had a chance to recollect each other and go back on the list and check who was allocated which stand. I'm saying that because remember that the area was demarcated and cut into stands and then allocated to deserving parties. And those people then went to building companies and banks to look for loans to buy the building material and build for themselves. So it was 163 that were occupied. We have evidence of it. We have a database of the people, and between 30 and 40 unoccupied. I might just add that, by the way, those houses were better than the houses that the state builds.
Thanks for that critical information, and we'll obviously appreciate it even more if you can favor us with some statistical document to that extent. Then I'll just move now to my last question. This one is more of an open-ended question, but we'll greatly appreciate any sharing of information from your side. Do you perhaps got any other information relating to the Alexandra renewal project itself that you may share with this commission? It's well understood and it's public knowledge that it's a project that was started way back in 2001 with a business plan of estimated budget of 1.7 million. But this commission knows by now that that project has since collapsed and it's been closed due to challenges relating to implementation. So, in a nutshell, it's no longer there. So, do you want to share with this commission any information that relates to the Alexandra renewal project, being a leader on the ground in Gauteng, who happens to be closer to the people and probably people of Alexandra, you may have taken interest to this project itself?
Thank you. It's actually similar to the Gauteng City Region project that Makura started in the province, that only exists financially and no one sees any benefit from it, and a lot of money is spent on it. And the eGov project that they claimed they did on artificial intelligence and spent over $1 billion on it, and we've opened fraud cases and corruption cases with the Hawks. That's in a nutshell my view on the Alexandra renewal project. Safe to say that the people who must answer and are accountable are Mike Maile and Paul Mashatile in the main. I think Mike Maile was the CEO of that project, and Paul Mashatile, of course, in his role, I think, as premier at the time, and a political leader of the ANC, which was governing when they started the project. I just wanted to correct that it was not 1.7 million that was budgeted, it was 1.7 billion. And of course, the traces of that money, you would help us a lot to follow, because even the people of Alexandra don't know what has happened with that money. They don't know what has happened with Alexandra renewal project itself. The last thing is that I'm aware that the city of Joburg has instituted a forensic audit and investigation into the Alexandra renewal project, and therefore it would be best to also get from them the extent of their forensic investigation. The only thing that I'm aware of as well is that there's been frustration on the part of the municipality, and they've even requested us to find a way of assisting them to get cooperation from the National Prosecutions Authority, because some of their forensic investigations have advanced and have a lot of evidence and conclusions. The only thing they need is prosecution, and it looks like the NPA are dragging their feet or somehow believed to be reluctant to prosecute. Lastly is that there are people implicated, of course, in the looting of the Alexandra renewal project, but that investigation by the city will give you the results, and a proper criminal procedure must be followed in order to bring people before the courts, because the investigations have already been done. That is the only thing that we have to say on the Alexandra renewal project. The people who led the project must account for what has happened to the money and why the project has not yielded any results, tangible results for the citizens of Alexandra, who are the intended beneficiaries.
Thanks. It's so interesting that you also mentioned that fraud cases were opened with the South African Police Service, Hawks. Who are the complainants on those cases? Is it the economic freedom fighters or any other? Is it?
I was just drawing a parallel between certain key projects that have been done where money has disappeared and there's no tangible outcome. The one particular case I'm referring to is the one into the artificial intelligence project under David Makura and Barbara Creasy, which the EFF opened with the Hawks, and we have the case number. We're happy to give you the details. But I also wanted to assure you that we will give you the database that you requested for the 163 households.
Oh, yes, I will appreciate the inclusion of those case numbers so that we can follow up on them for ourselves. And thank you so much. That concludes questions from my side.
Thank you, Ms. Mashego, for your submission. The main reason that the EFF was invited here today is because the former MEC for Human Settlements, I believe it was, made an allegation during his testimony before this commission that the EFF, through certain statements, was in part to blame for the rising, as he called them, land invasions in Alexandra, increased occupation of land in the area. That's why we're here. And there are other side issues that we're also discussing that are helpful, I guess. But the biggest question seems to be, why is the EFF advocating for people to commit unlawful acts? That doesn't concern me. The problem is that when people occupy land, in Alexandra specifically, we know that the outcome is never good for them. We have a very good example of what happened now recently with the Red Ants and this eviction and demolition, and more investigation will be done. But if you occupy municipal land, you will be evicted from that land. Eventually, sooner rather than later often. When you are evicted, this is according to what you as the EFF are saying now, the Red Ants come in, especially mass evictions. There are severe human rights violations. People lose their property, money that they've invested into building on this land. So there are severe legal consequences to occupying land. It's not as simple as if you see a piece of land occupied. What it should read is if you see a piece of land occupied. But note that in terms of Section 4 of the Prevention of Illegal Eviction Act, you may receive a notice, and so on and so forth. And you may end up in the cold and be evicted probably in winter. These are severe consequences, and the allegations that we've received as the Commission is that we've got these people who are now unlawfully occupying land, regardless of your stance on whether it's constitutional or not, what the moral obligation of us as a society is to these poor people. These people are being evicted, and there's an allegation that some of them occupied that land because they were propagated to do so by the EFF, by the Commander-in-Chief of the EFF and other leaders and representatives saying this. If that's the case, if the EFF has, let's please stick to Alexandra for now. If the EFF has said occupy land, people have gone in, occupied that land, and inevitably been evicted and had terrible things happen to them this winter. Did the EFF warn them beforehand of that? Inform them? In addition to the fact that you are of the view that they are entitled to this land, are they also educated to the fact that if they do exercise that entitlement, A, B, C, D will happen to them? Is the EFF in any way responsible for the state these people find themselves in now? Have you sent them like lambs to the slaughter to be inevitably violently evicted from land without their prior knowledge?
No, the EFF is not responsible for the landlessness of our people. It's Jan van Riebeeck and his friends. And then additionally, it is the misguided actions or slow actions under the ANC to redistribute land. The EFF has never encouraged or sent people to the slaughter, as you put it. The EFF would never do that. The land occupation program, we repeated earlier, is not originated by the EFF. It's not our invention. It has been there for centuries, and it is there based on a need, not luxury. You will note that none of the areas where we've occupied land, people have built sort of opulent structures for entertainment, etc. So there's by no means is it fair to suggest that it's an action that is not well thought after, etc. And the EFF did not invent land occupation specifically in Alexandra. It has always been there. Alexandra grew. If you can go and look at the size of Alexandra, even in '94, the population, etc., encroachment of structures on small. There's no vacant land, by the way, in Alexandra. It's a misnomer. I'm not sure why I even allowed, I think out of respect, I allowed all of you to ask me about occupation of land in Alex. Which land? Because I explained right in the beginning that if you go to Alexandra, you'll find houses on pavements. Those are illegal. You'll find 20 shacks in one yard. And then you'll find huge rats that look like cats. At night, if you don't know a rat, like you see the rat and you think it's a cat, you change your mind once you see the tail and the face. And those rats are eating children. And it's for that reason that people must go and look for better places for themselves to stay, because they have been failed by this society that you say, Mr. Du Plessis, has a moral obligation to its people. This society has never exercised its moral obligation to its people. Never. It has never, ever exercised its moral obligation to black people, poor black people, even so-called black middle class. It doesn't satisfy its moral obligation to black middle class. Black middle class think they are wonderful because they are sitting in jobs, but those jobs are under threat most of the time. They don't even get promotions. White people walk into a job, after 3 months they are bosses. Black people must sit there for 5 years. So I don't know why we even talk about class division. Somebody earlier asked me about classes. There's no classes amongst black people. We're all poor. We're all one paycheck away from being in Alexandra. So I reject the notion that the EFF drove land occupation. I reject the notion that, and when I say drove, I mean initiated it. It's our policy, yes. It's our program, yes. We agree to that. But I reject that we originated it. We did not. I reject the notion that we originated it for frivolous reasons. We did not. The people occupy land because they need it. They are in desperate need of shelter. They are even willing to build their own houses, Mr. Du Plessis, like they did in in Extension 5 in Silvertown, in Ward 109, Alexandra, the area under discussion. They built those houses themselves. The main reason is that they will tell you themselves, they're sitting with C forms from 1996. They said to government, okay, it's clear you can't give us houses and you feel that we are pushing you too much. That's okay. Give us land with serviced stands, which is what EFF is saying. If we were governing, we would identify land, give people service stands, or even rebuild the old flats that are no longer habitable, right? Because we are living in a modern society. People can't get houses anymore. You'd have to be practical and build flats, for instance, right? But people are saying, okay, where there's land, we can build it ourselves. They've demonstrated it. And what did the state do? They came and demolished it one Friday morning at 8 o'clock on the 31st of May. Ambushed poor black people. So if that is the moral obligation you're talking about of the red ants and those rogue people in the city of Joburg who sourced the red ants, and the SAPS and JMPD officers, those rogue officers who participated in that against a resolution of council, if that is the moral obligation you're talking about, then I don't want to be part of it.
Thank you. I had to steer very, very hard against the tide of political talk there, and it does not answer my question. So I'll put it simpler now. If someone came before this commission tomorrow, someone who was evicted in Alex, and said, I got evicted from my house, I occupied there. I thought it was perfectly fine to do it because I heard Julius Malema say I must occupy it. And I suddenly got thrown out of my house, beaten by the people who evicted me. My possessions were crushed, lost my ID book. And they wanted answers from the EFF. Why did they not warn me? That's the question. I don't want to talk about the other issues. I want to talk about specifically now the slew of land occupation and evictions that have been happening very recently in Alexandra, and the specific statements made by the EFF, because we've received specific allegations about that input. That's all. If someone came today and asked, the EFF was there when they told me to occupy the land, where were they when it was taken from me? What would the EFF say to that?
Okay, let's deal with logical things. You invited us here as a political party. Now, I'm not sure why you would not expect us to give you political engagements. Yeah, so you must steer clear from making silly statements like that.
I did expect it. It's just
Yeah, with all due
it's not
respect,
what we
I'm
need.
speaking. I never interrupted you when you spoke. Must not do that. You're not entitled to tell me how to speak, because I'm not entitled to tell you how to speak. I'm saying to you, you invited a political party here. I've got the invitation here. It's addressed to the EFF Secretary General. I also explained, when the chairperson explained that he accepted the apology of the Commander-in-Chief, that we also are participating in the context that this is very much a local issue. That even if the Commander-in-Chief had come, we would also be here to add and give you the local context, because you would understand he's the President and Commander-in-Chief of the entire organization in the country and leads this revolution, by the way, throughout Africa. You don't have to frown, it's a fact. There are EFF structures in at least 10 different African countries now, whether you like it or not. So this political speak that you are complaining about, you are still going to get it from all over the continent. It's growing. And I also stated earlier, because your question is not unique, I'm indulging you. I'm indulging you, but I didn't have to answer any of your questions. They were not unique. Ms. Kasiboto asked me the same question you asked me. Ms. Buga asked me similar questions to what you're asking me. Ms. Fitzgerald asked me similar questions that you're asking me. And Mr. Dlamini asked me similar questions to what you're asking me. There's nothing new about you saying that Uhuru made allegations. People made reference to it before you. And out of my kindness, I chose to respond to you. Then you come and abuse me. Actually, you are insulting. I'm an elected leader, and I'm here with other elected leaders. And then you insult our organization and you expect me to thank you with a smile and British courtesy. I can't. You don't deserve it. I'm going to tell you for the last time. The EFF never called anyone to occupy land in dangerous places. I stated to Ms. Fitzgerald earlier, when she asked me the question, not Ms. Fitzgerald, Ms. Kasiboto, when she asked me earlier about whether we are not concerned, whether we are not reviewing our position based on the aggression, and I said, that aggression is as a result of our people suffering and trying to make, find themselves, safe shelter. By the way, something which the Constitution guarantees, and if a right is guaranteed in the Constitution, it is the state that must make sure that right is realized. And people have moved beyond expecting the state to give them houses, despite the state having promised them those houses. And I then even draw a parallel to her to say, if you are raped, if you remember, is it fair if someone comes and asks you, what are you going to do to stop yourself from being raped in future? The aggression and the violence you talk about is not meted out by neighbors of our people against each other. It's the state. It organizes itself, even illegally, as has happened in Alex, to come and mete out that violence and put bullets in guns, which are paid for by the taxes that the very same people are paying. You want to talk to me about morality. What kind of morality is that? It's nice for you to speak like that because you don't know what it is to stay in a shack where Mr. Du Plessis. It's very nice. You've never stayed in a shack. Your mother has never stayed in a shack. I've lived in a shack with my parents.
Sorry.
No, I'm going to be personal because he was personal with me.
Now, can we, because I still have to ask my questions, and we don't want a dialogue between the two of you.
No, there will be no dialogue, Chair.
Yes,
I
can
asked a simple question that other panel members had asked before, but there was no answer. So
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
withdraw the question.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Land is not a mere commodity, but it is an essential element for realizing, for the realization of many other human rights. And what was submitted before this commission was the consequences thereof. Whilst the person who submitted this acknowledged the need to release land, the main concern was the impact of the poster on land occupation on other rights, or on the fulfillment or realization of other rights. I want to ask you, would the position of the EFF on land occupation change if the mechanism provided for in the Constitution, Section 74, which provides the mechanism for the amendment of the Constitution, would your position on land occupation change if the Section 25 is amended as per your motion in Parliament?
Thank you. I think it's clear, Mr. Jones, that we all understand that if people had access to land, and I must state that at no cost for primary housing, black people especially, that there would be no need for them to occupy land. Then the second aspect I wanted to highlight to you is that even these laws that we are talking about are not even laws that were made by black people actually, originally. Especially the dispossession laws. The dispossession laws were not democratically promulgated in the British and Afrikaner governments prior to 1994. They weren't. So on what grounds must black people subject themselves to unjust laws that didn't consider them when they were promulgated? But the last aspect is that, just to reiterate, that the same way that former President Nelson Mandela was declared a terrorist right up until he was even inaugurated as a president, which basically means that throughout his imprisonment, etc., he never gave up until, attainment of his own organization's goal, which was the right to vote, in my understanding, and still defied the laws of South Africa at the time and got sworn in as a president. Remember, you can't be sworn in if you have some sort of criminal record as an MP or whatever. But exception was made for former President Nelson Mandela. Why is that? I just want us to also consider that as part of the answer. And therefore, we will not rest until land is restored back to people in a reparative way, which means reparations are due to black people. And the least, and black people have never received reparations in South Africa for 376 years of the colonial dispossession. And therefore, the poverty and inequality we see today can't be resolved through any other means. And the homelessness and the lack of support for their human rights, which we refer to, can't be achieved until the ultimate right is the right to land. And we won't stop any of the work that we are doing until land is restored back to our people, and we don't have a single black person in South Africa who has to find himself occupying land and exposing themselves to a violent state after occupying because they have nowhere to go.
A follow-up to that is, would your position also change as the EFF should you attain political power in one of the metros in Gauteng on your position on land occupation?
No, it wouldn't, because the only thing that would make us sort of relax our program is if the Constitution, Section 25, is changed, but not only changed, but that government puts resources and actually implements the redistribution program. And the day that we can wake up and say, we are done, we've allocated land for at least basic human settlement, a decent house, with sanitation, with a decent toilet, with water, with amenities in those communities, with jobs in those areas, quality jobs, proper roads, safety, etc., etc. All the things that the human rights outline. Until that day, we wouldn't be happy with anything. Running one municipality doesn't mean you've attained anything. It's just a technical thing.
There's been several evictions in Gauteng, and some under the current leadership at the city of Johannesburg. And in some of these evictions, EFF was not visible. Do you perhaps have a response or some answer to that? Rabi Ridge, Lenasia, EFF, and other evictions was not as visible as you were last week, Friday and Saturday. Why is that?
I will also confer with the Joburg chairperson on your question, but in Lenasia, I was even personally there. Like myself, I was personally there. And I can give you evidence because I'm saying over and above other leaders at regional level, I know there were at least 2 other provincial leaders there. I was personally there. There were media interviews conducted and you could trace them. That's on your example in Lenasia.
In Rabi Ridge?
On Rabi Ridge, I'm not aware of it. I was not even aware of the eviction in Rabi Ridge. The EFF is not government. So we reach out as often as we can, where we can. We don't have a particular targeting. However, our branches do respond on their own. And the reason you would believe that EFF was not there is because you didn't see a high-profile person or someone that you are familiar with, or the media is familiar with. Let me not say you, sorry, I withdraw that. That often society would think because Mbuyiseni Ndlozi is not there, then EFF is not there. We have in excess of 480, actually close to 500 branches now in Gauteng. Yeah, Gauteng has 529 wards, and the EFF is in just over 90% of the wards. So we do get fighters who respond, but I will confer with the Joburg regional leadership just to confirm whether there were any other members from the regional command team of Johannesburg or PR councillors who may have been there. But on the Lenasia ones, we were there full time.
Okay. No, thank you. The reason I'm asking you about this is because in Silvertown, where you have a very visible, there's going to be a by-election. Was your presence there motivated for political gain or to address the genuine issues of the people of Silverton, Ward 109?
In Rabi Ridge, I just received confirmation because our legal representative also works as the EFF prosecutor internally. And so some of the cases he gets involved in indirectly from a legal point of view. We have a fighter called Washington Maponyane, whom he confirms was involved in that matter of Rabi Ridge, just for the record, because I had said I would confer with Joburg Regional. So there's no need to confer with the regional chairperson because EFF was there.
So my second question around
And the regional leadership was there.
the upcoming
I'm coming to it.
voter registration this weekend and subsequent by-election in July, was your presence last week motivated by this?
Yeah, so the Joburg regional leadership, just on the record, was also very active in Rabi Ridge. And I just want to add that it may sound like an event to everyone else because you're not engaged in it, but often the land occupation struggles, they have a sort of a peak, but they continue for a long time after because we have to make sure the municipality formalizes the area, et cetera, et cetera. So we don't get involved on an events basis. We can scale down our involvement, but we often are there much longer after the initial process started with the community. No, we are not. We are active in many wards, many wards. There are many places, the chairperson and I can tell you, where we deploy people on a daily basis, but they are low-key activities, so you're not aware of them. We don't become active in a ward because of by-elections. Yes, of course, we have a right to campaign and intensify our campaign. However, the process to extend, to build houses there started in 2017. And various leaders of the EFF have been there. The chairperson is even particularly from Joburg deployed to Alexandra and spends a lot of time there, on and off. But because there was no high-level event, you would not know about it. And of course, the impression must not be created that we don't have a right to contest. We contest every by-election. It doesn't matter the result outcome. And so we were not particularly encouraged by the by-election. In fact, I didn't know that there was a by-election there. I only found out, I think, on Sunday that there's a by-election due. Even the provincial secretary was not aware that there might be a by-election there. So definitely we were not motivated for other political reasons except the reasons we've stated of land hunger.
And what we've really tried to solicit is an appreciation of the consequences of your stance on land occupation, particularly when it comes to provision of basic services. And it is still not clear to me. But the next question is, has the EFF ever embarked on a land occupation program in the suburbs of Johannesburg? There's Innisfree Park in Sandton. Have you ever embarked on such programs? Because you said you have an allocation committee and so forth. Yeah.
Okay, let me first correct you on the allocation committee. The allocation committees and steering committees and housing committees are community entities. I didn't say they are EFF. EFF participates in them. I even made an example for you where there was a multi-party participation in the occupation in Lenasia South, if you remember. And I stated the ANC was there, Sanko was there, and other organizations, and we were there, but we were leading the process. So those are not permanent committees of the EFF. They are based on the community's land occupation program. But you would know the, what is that place called? Mall of Africa. You know the Mall of Africa. I think it's under Ward 32 in Johannesburg. 132 in Johannesburg. A couple of years ago, you may have seen, because it also received a lot of media attention, we occupied land there. And I'm saying not inside the Mall of Africa, but the vacant land that is allegedly owned by the people who claim that the Mall of Africa land is theirs. Let me not go into those politics. So that's one example. I'm not sure what would classify. Okay, yes, in my area, in North Riding, when I was chased by the Red Ants in 2014 with the chairperson of Joburg, we occupied land, vacant land, which was allocated to Jackal Creek. Do you know Jackal Creek? At the time, it was part of Ward 114 or 100, or in between the two wards. 100 is Cosmo, and you know Jackal Creek is between Cosmo and Zandspruit, informal settlement. So it's between Jackal Creek and Zandspruit, open land. We call it, we have a name for it, Bukamuso. We gave it a name. It's Bukamuso. Actually, I must not say Jackal Creek. We occupied it successfully, and it's in a suburb. And then also Blowboss Rand, yes. Blowboss Rand, which you know has an informal settlement which has been growing. But at some point it had stopped where the suburb starts. But we did. That's Ward 96. I'm only giving you 3 because they are sort of close to my area. If we looked at our reports, organizational reports, you might find more examples for you. But I don't think you'll have better examples than the heart of the economic hub of Africa in Johannesburg. Now,
Okay.
Your last question was about whether we would occupy Innisfree Park. Yeah, exactly. So besides the fact that Innisfree Park is occupied, we also don't occupy, remember we occupy vacant, unused land. Are you with me? So if, for instance, let me say the communities, if, for instance, the government said, no, we're building a clinic here, or a church even, right, or a creche, or anything for public use, and indeed the construction plans are there and something starts, they can't just say it and then for 5 years the land is cordoned off, nothing is happening. Then it's vulnerable for occupation.
Just on that, are you aware that people in Alex occupied land earmarked for a fire station that they desperately need?
Okay, I don't know about that, but I can even tell you just off the cuff that the condition of even the existing fire stations that are not even resourced, they don't even have fire engines, the chairperson of Joburg can expand for you. So chances of that being a lie by whoever said they've earmarked are extremely high, because you can go to Tabulani fire station now.
City of
There's
Joburg.
doesn't have a truck. You remember when the firefighters died a few years ago? Do you know what was the situation there? And do you know how that fire eventually got extinguished? They had to get a truck from the airport. They couldn't find a competent fire truck here in Johannesburg. So it's a lie, just on the basis of what I'm saying to you. They create plans whenever they see that people want land. They just come up with a plan all the time. They do it to us all the time. Even the story of vets, I don't really believe it, but I'm trying to respect your meeting.
All right. The mayor of Johannesburg has promised to rebuild the houses that were demolished last week. Has he, because you were with him, has he said where these houses will be rebuilt, or will they be built on the same land, or there's a municipal site earmarked for building of new shelters or housing for these people?
I'm not the spokesperson of the executive mayor of Johannesburg. You're going to have to refer that question to him, but we want houses rebuilt urgently.
You earlier said, because I want to take you to the ARP now, Alex Renewal Project. You mentioned the name Mike Maile. Is Mike Maile a business person, an official of government? Who is exactly Mike Maile?
He was the CEO of the Alexandra Renewal Project at the time when it started. And I mentioned it in the context of him accounting for monies that are now untraceable, along with the political head at the time of the ANC, who was Paul Mashatile. And by the way, coincidentally, they both claim to come from Alexandra as well.
Does the EFF have any evidence that could assist this commission? Any evidence of corruption, maladministration, improper conduct, abuse of power concerning the ARP? And if so, can you send it to us in the form of a written submission?
Any evidence that we may have or even get hold of after this meeting, we were happy to provide it to you, but I also referred you to the City of Joburg's forensic investigations, which are prime and ready for prosecution. But you can refer that to the city.
Yes, the group head will be making his submission after lunch. Thank you again for your participation, and we have noted the apology. We thank you for taking questions from the panel and for cooperating, and we look forward to further submissions from the EFF. Thank you. We'll now break for lunch and reconvene at 2. Thank you.